It's a Thursday night on the YouTube home for BamaOnLine.com. That means Thursday Night Tide. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BOL, alongside Clint Lamb. And coming up here in about 25 minutes or so, we'll be joined by Jimmy Stein as well. Clint, you checking out some games tonight? I know we've got the Lions and the Packers on the Amazon. Excuse me, I got a little bleed over here. Let me fix this. All right, there we go. Little technical difficulties, but I think we got it worked out. You know what you don't want to do, Clint? You don't want to have the YouTube browser for the show open at the same time that you're trying to actually do the show. Just figured that out. Quick learner right here on live stream. But you've got the Packers and the Lions. Last check, it looked like the Lions were threatening to boat race the host Packers. That would be 4 straight wins for the Lions over the Pack. You got some college football. Gone are the days, though, right, where you had some Power 5 matchups it seemed like you could look forward to on a Thursday night. I guess the NFL has kind of squashed some of that. All due respect to Jacksonville State, by the way, which is playing Sam Houston right now on ESPNU, but still not that selection of college games that we used to have a few years back.
No, it's certainly not. I think Isaiah Buggs, I think he got a sack tonight. So, I mean, obviously, every time you turn on an NFL game, there's an Alabama player somewhere, one side of the ball or the other, doing something spectacular. So I guess it's Isaiah Buggs night.
Yeah, and Isaiah a couple weeks ago, I don't think he was active, maybe for the season opener or had been released. And so good to see him back doing some big things for the Detroit Lions. But certainly we're going to talk a lot about Alabama and Mississippi State on a Thursday night. Nick Saban had his weekly radio show just before we took to the live stream. We'll get into some matchups for this game on Saturday night over in Starkville. Interesting on a number of levels because we heard Saban tonight on the radio show. And by the way, Charlie Potter kept us up to speed with those nuggets coming from the radio show there at BamaOnLine.com. Saban really feels like, or at least this is his public stance, that this game is a bigger challenge for Alabama than the one it just cleared with Ole Miss. And he continues to cite the physical nature of Mississippi State, more so probably on the defensive side of the ball. And then Clint, he also, I know, is aware of taking this deal on the road with Jalen Milroe. And specifically, it seems as if, just reading the tea leaves a little bit, most of his comments are in relation to the Mississippi State defense and the potential problems it could cause this Alabama offense.
Yeah, and, with Jalen Milroe, you got A&M last year, you got MTSU, you got Texas, and of course, you had last week against Ole Miss. A lot of home games. Obviously, he came in for Bryce Young last year against Arkansas on the road, but haven't really seen him be a starter on the on the road yet. I'll be curious to see how he ends up looking on that front.
Absolutely. That's going to be a storyline for sure going into this game. And it has been all week. I think it starts with continuing to play to the strengths, not just of the offense. I know we've talked about that a lot in relation to this offense. Play to the strengths of Jalen Milroe, play to the strengths of the offensive line and even the skill personnel with these running backs. But I think as much as anything, protect that defense at all costs, right? Because even if the Alabama offense isn't dynamic and doesn't light up the scoreboard like South Carolina and LSU did before it in wins over Mississippi State, first and foremost, road W's are still precious. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Nick Saban. I don't care if you're Billy Napier. There's a lot to be said about road wins, especially within the league. And right now, what we do know about this team is that it has a championship caliber defense and it also has championship caliber special teams. So if you can keep the offense from endangering the defense and or the kicking game, this is a game Alabama should win.
And not just win, they should win pretty handedly. I mean, it's like, and the good part about having that elite defense, or we think that it's elite, is playing like an elite defense right now. The fact that you've got the special teams, there's certain elements that you need your quarterback. You need to surround your quarterback with a good offensive line with good protection, a reliable run game that can complement the passing attack. A defense that can be opportunistic, take advantage of some things, put the offense in good positions, maybe with some turnovers, keep the score low to where there's not a ton of pressure on the quarterback to go out there and make a lot of plays. Um, and I think Alabama did a really good job of that last week. Even though things were kind of dysfunctional for the offense in the first half, the defense kept things, in check. I remember at one point saying, I think I even tweeted it, uh, Alabama can't go down 14-3 here. I think it was after Ole Miss had scored. Alabama had, I think gone 3-and-out or something, but Ole Miss had gotten the ball, and I was like, this is a huge drive because if they go down and score again, this offense isn't built to play from behind in this double digits. So, you know, as long as they can continue to do that, if we don't know about the run game, we don't know about the offensive line. Obviously, they took a lot of positive steps last week, but to me, it's still an unknown because it's only one half of football. But if they can continue to do those things, I think that really bodes well for taking care of your quarterback and putting him in the best position to be successful.
Yeah, we'll talk about maybe our thoughts on what constitutes success for Jalen Milroe on Saturday night. In retrospect, when this game is over Saturday night, what will be the barometers that you have or we have when it comes to successful versus unsuccessful for Jalen Milroe in his first road start? We also, of course, want your feedback, your questions, your comments here on Thursday Night Tide, and we'll get those going with John Hash checking in here. And we got a few. Josh Batchelor, we're going to get to you in just a little bit. Tex Tider, my guy, my Wilt Chamberlain guy on the roundtable there at BamaOnLine.com. Tex, howdy to you. We're going to get to you in just a little bit. You are looking for a shutout this week. John Hash asks, what do you guys think will happen at left tackle this week? Supposedly a 50-50 battle right now with Caden Proctor and Elijah Pritchett. We saw both those guys. It was mostly Proctor last week. Nick was sort of ho hum about the performance of the two left tackles in the win over Ole Miss. I thought the pass protection in general was better. So what do you think? Is this thing on the verge of maybe Elijah Pritchett surging ahead? I think you have to be careful in some ways with Caden Proctor. You put him in this situation as a true freshman. You put him out there. And obviously with that, and you're thinking big picture with Caden Proctor, you're thinking he's going to be one of your guys at tackle, whether it's left or right in the next couple of years. So not that he's fragile psychologically, but that plays into it too when you're dealing with a guy's confidence, I would think.
Yeah, and that great points. I mean, and you see this with young guys all the time at every position, but especially some of these marquee positions like left tackle is so important to the success of an offense. The blindside protector, mostly it's going to be your left tackle, but I guess there are some instances, to a Tagovailoa where it's your right tackle, but the blindside protector is so critical to the success of your offense. And LSU last year with Will Campbell, that was a true freshman 5-star player. He didn't struggle as much early as Caden Proctor has. So there are some differences, but it was interesting to watch him kind of struggle a little bit early. And then by the end of the season, he just continued to get better week over week. And I think that LSU was a better team for it at the end of the year. Alabama's elected to kind of not throw a JC Latham out there too soon, play him, inside to start his career. Evan Neal, start him off inside. He was a starter from pretty much day one, but, started off inside. But you've had some veteran players who have began the season as the starter, and some of them have finished where you've elected to go with more of the veteran presence that maybe, after 5 or 6 years when a guy's in your program, he is who he is, expecting some kind of major jump as far as his talent or production or ability or whatever. It's kind of difficult, but a young player where they start is not where they're going to finish. And Caden Proctor is an excellent example of that. I thought he got better last week. I thought Alabama simplified some things in the second half as far as what they were calling, as far as the run schemes and what it was requiring of the offensive line. And I thought he handled that well. I thought the entire group handled it well. And I'll be curious to see how he continues to improve because, when you have a guy like that, I guarantee you Mississippi State's dialing some things up or, drawing some things up to try to make his life difficult on Saturday. And he's got to be able to hold up. Alabama will probably do some things to protect him, but there are going to be instances where he's got to get the job done.
I know we've talked about expanding the quarterback run game as a potential helpful item for this offense. And I agree with that. I've been on record with that for a while now. But I liked how Alabama went about it early in the game against Ole Miss. Didn't just dial up a designed quarterback run for Jalen Milroe. They did it behind the left side. In other words, saying if you think you're just going to blitz our true freshman or beat him off the edge and pass rush, we'll line up and we'll run with our quarterback right at you off the left side. Try to keep these defenses honest, and certainly if you can run the football more consistently, that's going to help. And I think that may have been something that this Alabama staff was counting on. That we think from the opening snap to the final whistle, we're going to be able to run the football pretty much when and how we want to. And so that will conceal some of the inadequacies maybe that he still has as a pass protector. And when that didn't really happen, it left him exposed to some situations that, quite frankly, Caden Proctor not quite ready for at this point in his development. Josh Batchelor here, as promised, joining us via the comments on Thursday Night Tide. Where would you rank this pass rush duo in comparison to other Saban era teams? Clint, obviously, Josh talking about Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner. Boy, the last couple of weeks, they'd be up there with some of the very best we've seen do it. I mean, for me, Ryan Anderson and Tim Williams. Those were
So are
two
we
dudes.
including does it have to be just exterior guys, or can it be like, can you include Jonathan Allen in that?
I would say you could. I would think his point is more about edge, but absolutely, if you want to put guys like John and maybe Duran and Quinnen and some of those guys in that stretch there, absolutely.
Yeah, it's Jonathan Allen had that inside out ability. He plays a lot inside, predominantly inside in the NFL, but he was able to play some of that heavy end in Alabama's defense and was very successful. But I agree. I think more than likely the question was more so geared towards outside linebacker duos. It's unfortunate because I think that a guy like Will Anderson could have really benefited from how Alabama's attacking things this year with his pass rush. So having Dallas Turner last year, who has the ability to drop in coverage, I think that a lot of fans get frustrated with that fact. In some crucial situations, you'll see him drop. That's by design. It's just part of being a 3-4 based defense. Even though they don't run a whole lot of 3-4, it's the principles behind it. And Turner's extremely effective at it. Now you don't want him doing it a ton, but to provide some variety and the way that the defense has to adjust to the offense and what they're doing, he's going to be required to drop some. But when you look at how they've performed over the last 2 weeks, and what I think has been critical to the success of those two is the fact that they're getting at least some help from the interior guys. I will say if you've only got an interior pass rusher, i.e., Quinnen Williams in the national championship game back in 2018, you had some injuries at outside linebacker. Guys weren't fully healthy. You can kind of get your quarterback on the move, get him outside the pocket, and you can kind of negate or even in some cases eliminate the impact of an interior guy if that's all you've got. But when you've got the exterior guys, if you can get any sort of push, push the pocket from the interior guys, it's a great compliment. And I think that with Tim Smith, I think he had 1.5 sacks last week. Certainly a guy who's starting to show some flashes. I wouldn't say he's a dominant pass rusher by any means, but he's coming along. And then with Tim Keenan, who to me, he doesn't have the same efficiency as like a Jamil Burroughs. I thought Burroughs, he would flash incredible, interior pass rush on limited snaps that he got last year. But with Tim Keenan, I think he's doing enough on this in those situations where he's a great compliment to those exterior guys.
Yeah, Tim Keenan 3 quarterback hurries last week to go along with those 1.5 sacks. Absolutely. You start getting it from the inside guys, and then you see offenses like Ole Miss in the second half trying to single block Turner and Braswell with its offensive tackles, and they're down 14 points, and they're in comeback mode. That's a tough place for an opposing quarterback to live. We talk about some previous duos. I'll give you a couple that injuries in Atlanta robbed Alabama of. For much of the 2017 season, the season opener against Florida State, injuries to Terrell Lewis, injury to Christian Miller, That cost both those guys most of that season. And then in 2021, no one talks about Chris Allen and what he might have been opposite Will Anderson in 2021 because he was hurt, I believe, on a sack against Miami. He had that ankle injury. That was very unfortunate as well. Certainly, when you talk about Will and Dallas, as it still turned out to be in 2021, was very, very good. But people forget about where Chris Allen was at going into that season and what he might have been able to bring to the table. I think John wants to answer his question here about the left tackle situation. He chimes in after hearing us, Clint, that he thinks you stick with Proctor. Don't hate the idea of letting Pritchett getting a series here or there. I think Proctor gets a little fatigued with his build right now. I think that's a good point too.
Yeah,
That the play rate and how you can sustain. I think back to guys like DJ Fluker had to take a red shirt year as a freshman. I think it was back in 2009 because it's real stamina and being able to sustain over the course of 4 quarters at this level, especially when you're coming from Iowa high school football. And even if you did have a spring practice like Caden had, it's still a major step up, right?
Yeah, I remember hearing a story about DJ Fluker back when he was a freshman. He arrived. They had the 110s test for the freshmen coming in, and he had a shoulder injury, if I'm not mistaken, and he wasn't expecting to have to run. And I had someone tell me that he was rather shocked when Cochran said, "Hey, Fluker, you're running." He was not in shape. It was a struggle for sure, but then he ended up having that redshirt season, was able to get in shape. Had some first year struggles as a starter, even though he was a redshirt player. He was going into year 2. We got to remember Caden Proctor's in year 1. He was playing high school football last year. So he didn't have that year in the system. J.C. Latham was a guy who got a year in the system before he was thrown into the mix. And so Caden Proctor probably would have benefited from that, but this coaching staff likes the idea of kind of letting him work through some things. But I will say, Travis, I'm interested because based off of the response from Nick Saban when he was asked about left tackle, he was talking about injuries kind of forcing some guys to play some different positions. That kind of had me wondering, a lot of people, myself included, initially had thought maybe, Caden Proctor being more protected, playing more in a phone booth there at guard, you wouldn't have to deal with the SEC speed. Or, Elijah Pritchett was another guy who I thought he has the ability to kind of dig some people out and good run blocker coming out of high school. So I thought maybe he could end up playing inside at guard. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, it's really what we've seen in previous years, right? Whether Alex Leatherwood, Jedrick Wills actually played some guard very early on in his career. So it's been kind of that natural progression. If we're talking about tackles going into guard and then coming back out the tackle, Evan Neal certainly was one of those guys. So I think a lot of that still to be determined. And it also has to do with how are other guys developing, right? I mean, Ola Saline and some of these younger guys, Wilkin Formby as a tackle option, Miles McVay as a tackle option. I think Rock Montgomery has a solid future as a swing guy between center and tackle. So I think the future's still extremely bright for those guys for that 5-man class that Alabama signed. But there's just a lot being put on Caden Proctor here in year 1. You know what Tex Tider thinks about Saturday night? He says, throw in a couple of knots for good measure. Yeah, this was a team for a stretch of years. You could almost set your watch by those non-offensive touchdowns. Nearly had one last week with the block punt. It goes out at the 1-yard line of Ole Miss. And of course, we know what happened after that 40-yard field goal by Will Riker, just like you draw it up, right? You get first and goal at the 1. You're just trying to get the ball in the middle of the field back around the 22 because you got an All-American kicker. You're just trying to get him sized up. That's all that was. But knots, they always help, and they certainly help on the road. And I'm old enough. This is how old I am. My first trip to Starkville was in 1992. Night game, big crowd, crazy, good Mississippi State team. I believe that's Jackie Sherrill at that point. And Antonio Langham blocks a punt that goes for a touchdown. I remember that. Yeah. So maybe it's this week. Maybe it's this week. I'll tell you this much, right, Clint? Something better than field goals in the first half would be a nice thing. Alabama, the last 3 games in the first half, 5 field goals, maybe a touchdown in the first half this week in the first half. What do you think?
That's another great point, Travis. And the thing with this Alabama offense, when you get in the red area, you've got to help Jalen Milroe. You've got to have some success. We talk about, have early down success to where you're in favorable down and distances to kind of put him in a position where he doesn't have to be a straight drop back passer. The last thing you want to do is snap the football over his head, and now you're looking at a situation where it's first and goal from the 15, 20-yard line, whatever it was. That's certainly not what you want. And what happens? I mean, I think with Tommy Reese, he's still trying to figure out exactly, get into a flow of how to utilize Jalen Milroe. And sometimes when you don't have that early down success, he kind of gets in that habit of, okay, it's 2nd and 10, it's 2nd and 9. With a lot of quarterbacks, it's like, hey, we're probably going to have to drop back and throw the football a couple of times to try to get a first down here. With Jalen Milroe, that's not what you want him doing. So you kind of got to stick to the game plan, make sure you're utilizing his legs, but you've got to have that early down success. And I think with some of the struggles, once you condense the field and you're sticking 11 defenders in, a much smaller area, guys don't have to cover as much ground. It's a lot easier to spy the quarterback, do a lot of those different things. So it is even more critical in the red area to have that early down success to where the defense can't really key on any one thing. And I think that will certainly help him. But yet it's been an interesting first 4 games, that's for sure.
Just a little bit, with an emphasis on the offensive side of the ball. Josh checking back in. That Foley turnout early Saban years was insane. Yeah, and Robert Lester was kind of thought to be at the time a little bit of a throw in there. And he went on 2 or 3 time, I want to say, all SEC safety. Just a really, really good player for the Alabama defense over a handful of years. Robert Lester, back in the day, of course, Julio's Julio. And DJ, I would still say that 2012 Alabama offensive line, you probably got to put it on the pedestal of Nick Saban fives that he's had. Now, look, 2020 wasn't bad. As we know, that offense in general was somewhat generational when you look back on it, between what it could do both running it and throwing it. But DJ, obviously, a big part of that as well. It's about that time, as promised. How about some Jimmy Stein as we move forward here on the program?
Hey.
There he is.
Hey, guys.
Jimmy, are you locked into that JSU Sam Houston game? Can we get an update from Texas?
Is literally what I have been sadly almost watching. 21-7 Sam Houston over Jacksonville State as we talk. And I'm a little disappointed. I've been rooting for Rich Rod and the in-state guys. Feel like I know about half that lineup from following in-state recruiting, and not going well for the Gamecocks tonight.
Yeah. Sam Houston, traditionally a pretty good program.
Sure.
I think the FCS level, and then I can't keep up either, guys, with all these programs that are making the jump or have made the jump, like JSU to Division I. Good for them, but Jimmy and I, we're old enough to remember when a lot of these teams were in the old Division II Gulf South Conference, for crying out loud. Troy,
UNA.
I remember Troy State. UNA, absolutely. So West Alabama still holding it down, I guess, over in Livingston. Hey, Jimmy, we were talking earlier. Wanted to get both you guys' thoughts on this. What constitutes a successful start for Jalen Milroe on the road Saturday night in Starkville? We'll start with you, Jimmy.
I'm going to say, I know this just sounds so simplistic, but a win. The last 10 road games just haven't been pretty for Alabama, regardless of opponent. Now, they did play pretty well in Starkville the last time around with Bryce Young at quarterback, but I think a win of any shape, semblance, or size is acceptable, considering all that's kind of gone on, considering all that's gone on with Jalen Milroe, considering his lack of experience. Again, by far the least experienced quarterback in the league. I did something on the board last week about career pass attempts for all the SEC starting quarterbacks. Jalen Milroe had almost a tenth of the career passing attempts as the top 3 or 4 guys on the list. He was the least experienced guy in the league, almost by far. The only guy close to him was Carson Beck, who is in year 4 of his career at Georgia, not year 3, like Milroe is. I think considering how young Milroe is experience-wise, and Alabama not playing well on the road, except for maybe one time out of the last 10, I think a win of any kind should be considered a success, frankly.
Yeah, we're even getting to the point now, guys, and Clint, I want your thoughts on that, where we're seeing backups jump in like Max Johnson at Texas A&M, that when Alabama goes to A&M in a week, Max Johnson as the backup at A&M is going to have more starting experience still
a lot more
than Jalen Milroe. So that's what you're starting to see even in some of those situations, I guess, Clint.
Absolutely. And with, it being a road game, I wouldn't be shocked if you saw him kind of get baited into another one of those decisions where it's an ugly interception or something similar, taking some unnecessary sacks. This guy's still growing, so and these things are going to happen. It's going to be a hostile environment. He handled the Arkansas crowd extremely well, and I don't think we talk about enough the fact that things started to fall apart in Fayetteville for Alabama. They had a commanding lead early. They had taken control of the game. Things started to fall apart, and it was Jalen Milroe who kind of rose to the occasion. It was with his legs mostly, but he was able to kind of weather the storm, put Alabama back into a position where it was able to, it end up winning pretty handedly by the end of it. But I would like to see him avoid the turnovers if possible. I think it would be a wildly successful game. Obviously, Jimmy, it starts with the win. So Jimmy's absolutely right. Get a win. Doesn't matter if you have one or two of those ugly mistakes. Certainly don't want, a Texas game where you have one or two of them and it helps aid, a loss or something like that. But if he can avoid the turnovers or avoid the unnecessary sacks, just continue to take steps in the right direction. In the second half last week, we finally saw not just him, this entire offense moving in the right direction. You hope that they can continue to build on that momentum. No more ugly USF styles of games where you can't get anything going until late. No, snapping the football over the quarterback's head, on 1st and goal from the 1 yard line. That kind of stuff should be automatic. Take the stuff that you're given and capitalize on all of it and try to avoid those unnecessary turnovers. And if he can do that with what we think the rest of this roster is going to be, they can beat a lot of really good football teams in college football.
Yeah, we've heard Nick Saban say it so many times. Any possession that ends with a kick is a good possession. And there are some years where I think we could all argue that wasn't the case for Alabama, whether it was place kicking woes, whether it was punting woes here in recent years, even. This year, though, with Will Reichard and James Burnip, if you just take care of the football, you're either going to probably end up with 3 points or you're going to put the other offense inside its own 20 or in a position where it has to drive the length of the field against an ascending Alabama defense. So it's not just cliche this year.
And we don't talk about that enough. I mean, that the combination of James Burnip and Alabama's defense, that in just itself, at some point, that's going to win Alabama.
That should be 9 wins, shouldn't it?
I'm telling you, it is going to be the deciding factor in at least one football game this year. Mark my words.
Yeah, I think for Jalen, it's not that difficult to outline. I know it's easier said than done. It's not an easy gig that he has. Run the operation as smoothly as possible. Don't throw the ball into trap coverage. That's it. That's pretty much it this week. If you do that, I think Alabama will be fine. And here we have TJP checking in. Reichard or Burnip win the Heisman? Just forget about the Ray Guy. Forget about the Groza. We've got 2 finalists that TJP has for us for New York City. No, seriously, though. Make good use of those guys. And Alabama has. I sort of joke about the first half touchdown woes that Alabama has had over the last 3 games. But again, this is a team that can win a lot of games like it won the Ole Miss game 24-10. Now, where you wonder about the rubber meeting the road a little bit is when you start talking about the real standard at Alabama, especially under Nick Saban. Championships. I think big picture wise, we've talked about this before, Jimmy. There still has to be some growth, and probably more than a little bit if Alabama's going to get there with Jalen.
With Jalen, yeah, sure. But I would start with defense in terms of, is this a championship level defense? Can Alabama win a championship with this defense? You see signs. I mean, one of the things I've kind of started this week, I'll probably drive everyone crazy with it since I just started it, and I'm going to keep going momentum wise. But every time I type the name Dallas Turner on the message board, I follow it with SEC Defensive Player of the Year. And that's because I can kind of see this coming. I mean, the way that he's been playing. I mean, and I think behind this defense, which has been fantastic for 15 of the 16 quarters Alabama has played this year. Now, they were outright awful in that 16th quarter. I'm talking about the fourth quarter versus Texas.
Got lit up, yeah.
The other 15 quarters, 2 points per quarter over the course of 4 games, just 8 points a game. That's, as a matter of fact, 8 points a game is what the 1992 defense gave up. And that's what Alabama's played like in 15 of the 16 quarters. I like what I'm seeing from the defense. Obviously, there has to be a bigger sample size for the offense to complement it and become a championship football team and not just a championship defense. To me, that means eliminating the errors. Like we talked about earlier, Travis, with Burnip, with the kickers, you can probably generate quite a bit of good things just from that group. The offense just has to steer clear of mistakes. There is no sign that the offense is going to play a completely clean game anytime too soon, but you can sort of see baby steps in that direction. That's what I'd like to see Saturday in Starkville, is a cleaner game. I think it's too much to ask considering the youth, considering not just the youth, but let's consider Tommy Rees new to Alabama, not just Milroe. It's a young offensive line when you look at career starts. I mean, Proctor and Booker, between the two of them, what are they up to? About 9 now, and that's 40% of the offensive line. So I think if the offensive line can play cleaner games, if Milroe can play cleaner games, this could be a championship football team. But boy, 7 SEC games to go. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but you got to love what we're seeing from the defense, guys.
Let's start by just having Alabama, the touchdowns that they score count, and stop having 47 touchdowns called back due to a penalty. If they could just get that fixed, I mean, they're going to be in much better position in a lot of these football games.
Yeah, you can survive these interceptions a lot better when you're not also losing touchdowns to go along with them. And you're really losing points when you throw red zone interceptions and then you lose touchdowns. You start looking at 6-7 points a game that this team is leaving out there just in penalties and mistakes on offense in general. So, Clint, as we let you go here, I'm going to give both of you guys a true or false. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the show. True or false, and this goes with what we've heard from Nick Saban in his assessment that this is a tougher game for Alabama than Ole Miss a week ago. Is that true for you, or do you see that as false?
Oh, man. On the surface, it looks very false to me. I'm not saying that Mississippi State can't provide some challenges, and the fact that it's in Starkville, I mean, that changes a lot too. I mean, Jalen Milroe in the offense, they had the crowd at their backs, not as much pressure. Those cowbells going, that can add a wrinkle or an element that's tough to overcome. And I mean, you even saw, I mean, I don't know if that home crowd with USF was really a home crowd for USF, but I mean, when you're playing on the road and things start going wrong, it can, kind of snowball a little bit. And so what they have to be able to do early on is whether the crowd, whether the cowbells get some things going offensively, take the easy stuff, and kind of establish, we talked all offseason about tone setters, setting the tone with your offensive line, bullying people, pushing people around. You didn't really see that at all. I mean, I guess at the beginning of some of these games, you saw the signs of it or the flashes of it, but the consistency to be able to do it, especially when things start going wrong. After the interception against Texas, they didn't have that same edge. USF, a couple of things don't go their way. They start, they lose that edge. Hammer the football, have success, establish yourselves as the dominant, physical tone setter of the football game, and then play off of that. But I would say, as far as your question, I'm going to go false. I think this past weekend was a little bit more challenging as far as personnel is concerned. But I will give, Mississippi State credit. They're running the football a lot better with Woody Marks. Obviously you got Will Rogers, a veteran quarterback who, over the last couple of weeks, they weren't really throwing deep passes over the first couple of games. They really started to turn it on a little bit over the last two, and that's helped them, keep things close. They lost both those games, but it kind of put them in a shootout with South Carolina last week, and they came close to winning that game. It can provide some challenges. I'm not saying it's going to be a cakewalk, but I'm going to say false.
And with that, Clint, we appreciate you, man, checking in and joining us here on Thursday Night Tide. Clint always doing a great job for us there at BamaOnLine.com. Check out all of his great work with us right there at BOL. Thanks, Clint. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely, Phil. It's good talking to you boys.
There he goes. Clint Lamb. He's off, man. He's out of here. And now there were two. Me and Jimmy, the old heads. We're supposed to be in bed. We're supposed to be in bed by now. We shouldn't be finishing this thing up, but I'll kind of move that towards you. And this, it's interesting because offensively, at least, Mississippi State and how it goes about its business, in most years, I'd say that's not a good matchup for State to be more pro style and essentially say, we're going to run systems that are similar to what Alabama runs with 3 stars instead of 4 and 5s. And as you know, that doesn't always play out so well. You look at Brian Harsin and what Auburn was going to be up against with what he likes to do just in terms of schemes. I always thought that was going to be a tough fit. But is Nick challenging more so his offense this week? Because I think when you look at Ole Miss, I can't, even after the game, I struggle to name a front 7 starter for Ole Miss other than Suntarian Perkins because of the recruiting aspect of things. But when I look at Mississippi State, I know Crumedy, I know Pickering, I know Johnson, and I know Watson at the linebacker position. So right there, that makes some sense to me that Nick would feel that way.
Yeah, Johnson and Watson. I mean, Nathaniel Watson, I think, is their absolute best player on defense. He's actually an Alabama native from little tiny Maplesville in Alabama, and Nathaniel Watson's had a great career at Mississippi State. He's one of those guys that before the game, regardless of opponent, you just write down Watson's going to have 10 tackles, and he does week in, week out. Really good player. Yeah, I think it's a challenge for Alabama's offense in particular to play through the noise, play through the cowbells, play against quality SEC athletes that Mississippi State has every single year on defense. And even though I can't go into the game naming a lot of these state guys, what I can promise you, Travis, because this is just, you can set your watch to this. Every year, Alabama plays Mississippi State, and they have a defensive back that on the field I'll look at and I go, why doesn't he play for Alabama?
Well, Marcus Banks used to.
Oh, exactly. There you go. There you go.
They do have one that actually played for Alabama in the past, I guess. But I get your point. Emmanuel Forbes, Martin Emerson. Every year you're right. Exactly. There's one. They have one that's going to be in the NFL for 10 years too.
Exactly. Total dude at defensive back.
Yep.
But what they're undergoing on offense, and since it's just the two of us old guys talking now, I know you'll remember this well. But you know what they're undergoing on offense, what it reminds me of? In 1989, Alabama had this Homer Smith offense. Starting quarterback gets hurt. They bring in Gary Hollingsworth. Homer gets out his pen and his napkin, and he sort of creates a new Gary Hollingsworth offense. And the next thing you know, Alabama's spreading it around. They've never done that before, ever. I mean, when I mean ever, I mean at least not since the 60s. Spread it around, throw into the tight ends, throw into the backs. And the next thing you know, this second or third string quarterback is SEC Defensive Player of the Year.
Right.
Alabama's scoring 40 points every week. It's this exciting spread, almost an air raid type offense, certainly for Alabama. And then Bill Curry moves on, and the new coach comes in as Gene Stallings. And Gene Stallings, because he had spent almost his entire coaching career in the NFL, Stallings shows up. He goes, you know what? We're going to run an NFL offense. We're going to run an NFL defense. We're going to have an NFL system here. And then Gary Hollingsworth and those same offensive players were put from the Homer Smith college air raid stuff into an NFL system. And let's be honest, that offense stunk.
Yeah, they couldn't score, especially really throughout that 90 season, but especially early. Lost the first 3? Brett Favre let it come back with Southern Miss.
Couldn't score against air. Couldn't
No.
score against air. I mean,
Struggled at
it was.
Georgia in a loss, Florida at home,
So isn't
Spurrier's
that kind
first
of what
year.
Mississippi?
Yeah.
Don't you see that's kind of what Mississippi State's doing, going from Mike
Yeah.
Leach
It's
to
a
what they're now
it's
pro
an
stouts.
analogy.
Yeah,
It's an analogy I've thrown out there, but I just felt so outdated in doing so. But I enjoy talking about it with you because I
exactly.
absolutely remember Saran Stacy and Kevin Turner and Marco Battle,
Lamont Russell.
Lamont Russell at
Lamont
about a
Russell.
195
Mhm.
lining up at tight end, but catching like 700 balls. Oh,
That's
you
right.
know those guys when that offense went away, and
Yeah.
then Beebs came in with that ground and pound, and
Well,
you know what? It worked. It paid off. He wanted more physicality. He wanted to be tougher and and play with defense first and foremost. And what? A couple years later, Alabama's the national champions after that Sugar Bowl
exactly.
win down
And
in
I'm not
New
saying
Orleans.
that's what's going to happen at State, but they're
No,
undergoing that similar transformation
yes,
that is ugly in the early going
and they
because
threw for
going
478 last week, which made no
true.
sense.
No, it almost seems like, and I've
Where did
watched the
that
whole
come
game
from?
tape. Yeah, it
Yeah.
almost seems like they're like, hey, you know what we've been doing? Let's scrap that. Let's do what we did last year. And
But it was
yeah,
pro concepts. I watched some of that
yeah,
South Carolina game, and it wasn't like they really changed conceptually. They were running some of the play action game and some of
pro
those
style.
things you see Alabama run. So it was
Mhm.
still very pro. It wasn't like this reverting back to the air raid. They didn't do that, but I'll tell you what they did do. They got Tulu Griffin inside against some star defensive backs and some safeties, and he just ate and ate. He had like 5 catches of 30 yards or more in that game last Saturday
Wow.
night, which takes us to the Alabama defense once again.
Right.
And Malachi Moore has been lights out through 4 games,
Sure.
and we expect to see that matchup perhaps with Griffin and Malachi. I've talked about this throughout the week. You probably have too. The luxury you have is on the outside right now. You probably feel like we can take Terry and Arnold, we can take Kool-Aid McKinstry, and we can say lock their outside guys up, and then we're going to help against Griffin or send numbers his way or attention or something if we have to. That's obviously going to be the matchup. Although with Deontay Lawson perhaps out for this game, it feels like it might be a wash though because you're hearing Woody Marks maybe isn't 100% at the running back position for State. Just a lot of things to consider in that matchup between the State offense and the Alabama defense.
Well, the Alabama defense, I think Malachi Moore, you mentioned, unbelievable season, and Deontay Lawson had an unbelievable season now, probably out for a couple games at the very least with an ankle sprain. But Malachi has been so good. And what's so impressive about him, Travis, is obviously at the star position where he was a third team All American as a freshman and he's making most of his plays now. But when Alabama goes to dime, which you'd have to do a ton against Mike Leach, I don't know if we'll see dime at all this week.
Our
Last
zone
year,
played a
you
lot of zone
just
against Mike Leach. Yeah.
that's right. And they defended it really well. Alabama sort of had Mike Leach's number. I mean, in terms of Alabama defended that Leach
Going
offense
back to Joe
really well.
Kynes, Alabama
Yeah.
did
Oh,
the Cotton Bowl.
2005.
Yeah.
2005 Cotton Bowl. I think they gave up 7, maybe the whole game. But man, Malachi Moore switching from star in nickel to money in dime and still maintaining that level of productivity has been so impressive. But again, I think we'll just see Malachi at star this weekend. I don't see Alabama playing a lot of dime. Alabama played 2 snaps in dime versus Ole Miss. I don't know that we'll see dime this weekend. I think it's just Alabama staying in nickel, keeping Malachi at star, where he can work on that slot receiver, work on the tight ends, and of course the star can get heavily involved in run defense as well, kind of sitting in the same spot the Sam linebacker would be in regular. Malachi has been a true superstar. This Alabama defense, I think this particular game, Travis, has Malachi's name written all over it. Also, Dallas Turner, SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I think Dallas Turner will also have a big game. Will Anderson had huge games against Mississippi State as Alabama's best pass rusher. I see Dallas continuing that, and Alabama's defense continuing to march on behind Malachi, behind Dallas. I see them as both strong first-team All-American candidates based on what we've seen so far, and I think it continues in Starkville.
Yeah. When you say not a lot of dime, guys like Trey Amos don't like to hear that.
Right.
Q Robinson doesn't like to hear that because
Their
those are
snaps.
guys, those are their snaps and that dime package that go by the board. But Alabama they were so good in nickel. And, look, I think Ole Miss with Quinshon Judkins and also with what Jackson Dart can do with his legs, you kind of got to stay in nickel. And Lane likes to keep a tight end on the field. I mean, Caden Prescorn last week, his first action of the season, even with Michael Trigg apparently moving on from Ole Miss, you had to kind of stay in nickel for much of the game. And I'm with you, probably more of the same this week against State. And you think about that inside linebacker position. If Lawson can't go, one of the silver linings, I guess, of that platoon that we've seen with Jahad Campbell and with Trez Marshall and with even Kendrick Blackshire, um, when Alabama opens on defense Saturday night, who do you think, if Deontay doesn't go, do you think it's Marshall and Campbell out there first, or could it be Blackshire and Campbell? Because for me, that's what it comes down to. I think Campbell's going to be out there, and then it's going to come down to Marshall and Blackshire, perhaps one or the other or both seeing a good bit of action in that game.
Yeah, I think right off the bat, Travis, I think it'll be Marshall and Campbell right off the bat, because one thing about Marshall is he's a green dot guy. And that's what you really look. Deontay had been a spectacular player, but he's also the green dot, for everybody that listens to the show that's also an NFL fan. You know what I'm talking about. The Mike linebacker that's the quarterback of the front seven, that's on the helmet that's got the microphone in it so he can hear directly from the defensive coordinator. That's Deontay. He's out. I see Trez Marshall as the new green dot guy. And Jahad Campbell, you can't take him off the field. He's playing more snaps than anybody other than Deontay now inside. I think Jahad Campbell, Travis, not just good, but great. He's on his way to great. This is going to be a great, great player. Not just, he's a starter as a sophomore. No. This is Alabama's one of their next great players. And he'll get better each week as he stays healthy, as you said. So I see it as Trez and Campbell. However, if the other team has some success running the ball inside, you can easily see replacing the 217-pound Marshall for the 238-pound Blackshire, roughly. If the other team's having some success in that area, I think Marshall might still be a little more rangy than Blackshire. And again, you lose Lawson, you need another green dot guy. So I see Marshall and Campbell, but I also see them playing extremely well. I've thrown some flowers at Robert Bala. I think he's probably getting an assist from Kevin Steele, who's sort of a roving position coach for Alabama, the defensive coordinator without a position. But Kevin Steele, his expertise is an inside linebacker. I think Steele and Bala together have this whole inside linebacker group playing great, to the point that you can lose Lawson, maybe your best player. But I bet you don't see a drop-off at that position in terms of the productivity this weekend. I think they'll be great again. And Campbell, again, future superstar.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern you would have would be almost similar to the green dot on offense, the quarterback, in that you don't want these guys to go rat trap without Deontay out there because of making calls and checks and, still having to play and carry out their responsibilities after all of that. I think that's, though, why you go to the transfer portal at both positions. Alabama went to the transfer portal at quarterback for an experienced guy and Tyler Buckner. It hasn't worked out as of yet. But I think the decision to bring in Trez Marshall has obviously been beneficial. Maybe the numbers aren't the kind that blow your hair back necessarily, but there is a level of dependability that going into this situation on the road, as you said, if you open the game with Marshall in that role, he's going to handle that, similar to Henry To'oTo'o before him. And give Henry a lot of credit. I mean, I saw him, for the Houston Texans last Sunday doing a number on my Jag, so didn't really appreciate that. But no, I think that it is doable. I wanted to ask you this, though. We talk so much about the good things with this Alabama defense right now, and they're easy to spot. Is there one area, though, that you look at still and say, maybe a little bit vulnerable? maybe one of the safety spots, maybe still interior DL or the defensive line in general, although we saw some encouraging signs from that group against Ole Miss?
Yeah, it's going to be real specific, which goes to show how excited I am about this Alabama defense, because nothing in general, I'll say, oh, I'm not sure against the run, or hey, I'm not sure against a team that's going to throw it 40 times. It's not that. But there is something specific that's going to make me nervous until I see Alabama do this well, Travis. And that game is coming up. We just talked about no dime against Ole Miss, probably not much dime against Mississippi State, probably not a whole lot of dime against Texas A&M. But Tennessee, they spread the field. They play fast. Now they run it. They're running it more this year than they ran it last year. But Tennessee, tempo-wise, still the fastest offense in all of college football in terms of tempo, and they go, go, go. I think you're going to see a ton of dime against Tennessee again, just like we saw last year. And all those points Alabama gave up, a couple of things about that dime group. You got Amos outside now, not, Terrion moves inside. Amos is outside. Heupel's going to attack that. Secondly, and the real concern for me, Travis, is Alabama's pass defense from those inside positions. Okay, I think I'd feel pretty good about Terrion maybe at star, but the freshman Downs, the 6th-year-old man, Jalen Key, almost as old as me and you, buddy.
No.
Jalen Key at safety. Downs, complete opposite, the 18-year-old at the other safety. Malachi Moore at money. Tennessee might be really good at getting those dudes matched up with slot receivers that give us trouble. So I know that's real specific, but I saw what happened last year. And until I see Alabama pass that test, I'm not going to really compare this defense to 92 or in 2011 and 2016 just yet, because that worries me.
Yeah, I think if you're an Alabama fan, your counter is, well, no Jalen Hyatt, who's going to be running free 6 yards behind the secondary. And I'll say this: I don't think Tennessee's offensive line is
Right.
what it was a year ago.
Right,
And
I agree.
for as much as we should talk about Tennessee and explosive plays in the passing game, because Alabama has fallen victim to that, not just last year, but also in the game in Tuscaloosa 2 years ago. It gets kind of hidden by last year's performance because it was even more explosive for Tennessee in that one. Tennessee wants to run the ball. They've got backs too. Jalen Wright, Jabari Small. They've got depth at the running back position. I don't think they're quite the same right now up front. And, Joe Milton's under fire too. And that's the easy sort of kind of like Jalen with Alabama. It's easy to look at the quarterback and say he's not performing, especially when you're following a guy like Hendon Hooker or you're following a guy like Bryce Young. And that's true to an extent. But the other areas that you were able to sort of hide some things because of your quarterback being so proficient, you're not able to do that now. And things become a lot more revealed than they were. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about Tennessee. It's never too early, though, right? I mean, we can talk about, is Nico Alamaliva going to be the quarterback in Tuscaloosa? All those things. We still got a few weeks, but you talk about,
you feel good about the defense when the question is what worries you about this defense, and I jump 4 games ahead.
Josh is checking back in here, and he has a question for us. If you had to predict what player is next to have a breakout week like Jalen Hale, breakout guy this week.
I love this question. I'm glad we got to it, Josh. Great question. One of the things that stands out to me, I talked about all summer, is maybe the number one trait on this Alabama team. In years past, it's been superstars. Alabama's got more superstars than anybody, proven great players. This year, I felt it was maybe a little shorter on proven superstars, but the depth of good, maybe a shortness of great, but the depth of good. And now we look up 4 games in the season. Alabama, with their first team offense, plays 3 running backs, 7 receivers, and 3 tight ends. That's a lot. So I think it's not easy for anyone to break out because they're spread so thin in terms of wanting to get the ball to all these guys. But if I had to pick out one that maybe hasn't had a 100-yard type game yet, and I think it's coming, as Amari Niblack, I think that might be matchup dependent. Maybe there might be some matchup more than others where you feel like, hey, we can really get the H free against this team, or we can really get a bigger slot guy a lot of work in this particular game, whatever it happens to be. But I would go Amari Niblack in terms of like who hasn't had a huge game statistically, and his day is coming.
I'm going to go with your guy, Jihad Campbell, on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's obviously had some statistical production. It's not that that hasn't been the case, but I just think every week he gets further removed from that injury that he had to work back through. We're just going to see more and more of those physical attributes that he brings to the table. And it's a running back centric offense, or at least it wants to be. I think Woody Marks only had 12 carries last week, but he still caught 3 balls. So Marks is going to have, if he's healthy enough, he's going to have 15 plus touches, which means your inside linebackers are going to be busy. So I'll go Jihad Campbell this week, and not just because of his work in the run game or even in coverage, but also what he can bring to the table as a blitzer. We've heard Nick Saban talk a lot this week about the expectation, and I'm going to hit you with this one on the way out, kind of jumping around. Nick Saban expects Mississippi State to come after Jalen Milroe. Do you think that would be the case? And if it is, and understanding it's kind of Zach Arnett's DNA, would you blitz Jalen Milroe? Or is the blueprint kind of out there? Rush 3, play a spy technique. He's not going to get to the back a lot of times, or some of the times he's not going to get to the tight end. He's not going to get to his check down. He's feeling some ghost pressure at times. He's looking to ditch. What do you think? What do you expect Saturday night? You think State comes after him, or do you think they go against their tendencies a little bit?
No, I think a coach is kind of what he is. And Zach Arnett is, first of all, I have a ton of respect for him as a defensive coach. I
Yeah.
think he's probably a guy we don't talk about enough as being, outstanding in that area. And he's seen Alabama a couple times now. I think he's going to pressure Milroe a lot. I think the best way to attack Milroe right now is force him to make decisions. Don't leave yourself to be out athleted, because you are
Right.
going to be out athleted. And I'm talking about his arm and his legs, but force the young quarterback to make decisions on the fly. I think that's how you do it. That's probably bringing the house a lot and then making it a lot of ad lib. But where Alabama can be really good, Travis, is if you do the, hey, we're going to rush 3 and drop everybody. I agree. That's a great way to defend Jalen's arm, because that's tough. That's what teams did to Alabama a lot last year. And the fans were complaining a lot. The wide receivers don't get open. Well, a lot of times they were trying to get open against 8 guys who dropped. It's kind of tough to find room. But if you drop 8 this year or drop 7, where Alabama can beat you up to death is just those running backs. That's fine. Okay. Jace and Roydell will 5 and 6 yard you to death if you do that. We'll just run RPOs and just run inside runs, and it'll be boring and it'll take a long time. But if you're just bringing 3 and you're dropping everybody else, the backs will just take 5 and 6 yards a snap. I'm not sure Alabama was equipped to do that a year ago, and they are now. So I sort of like the well-roundedness of the offense and dealing with whatever they come up with. I think there can be an answer, but in the end, it's about Jalen Milroe making the right decision and not ripping the kid again. I believe it's just a matter of inexperience for him, but this is now going to be, I think, the 4th or 5th start of his whole career. But after this next start and the one after it, you can say, hey, he's been a starting quarterback for half an SEC season now, and he's going to start to understand things. And that's the way I think it's going. And no matter what Zach Arnett comes up with, I think Alabama and Tommy Rees is going to have a pretty decent plan for it.
Yeah, this isn't a big screen offense, at least that we've seen as of yet in terms of the backs, which is one way you can deal with pressure. Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those games within the game to see if Arnett sticks to his guns, which frankly doesn't really fit his personnel this year. I mean, when you're bringing that kind of pressure and you're leaving that back end in man coverage in a lot of situations, not just in the vertical game either, but we saw it from South Carolina with Xavier Leggett last week, turning simple crossing routes into 70 plus yard touchdowns. That would obviously suit some of Alabama's inside receivers like an Isaiah Bond or a Kobe Prentice. It could be that yards after catch are big in those situations this weekend as well. Well, Jimmy, it's been a lot of fun, my man. Always appreciate you taking the time here on Thursday Night Tide along with Clint Lamb. And have a great weekend. We should have plenty to talk about, I think, next week. For Jimmy Stein, Travis Reier, thanking you as well for checking in with us. Thanks to everyone who contributed to the program this evening. It's Thursday Night Tide. Adios to you as well, Texas Tider. We'll catch up with you there on the roundtable. The premium message board at BamaOnLine.com. We got continuing coverage of Alabama, Mississippi State for you. And of course, recruiting never sleeps, whether it's football or, as we've seen in the last week, Alabama men's basketball continuing to make some big waves on the recruiting trail under Nate Oates as well. For Jimmy Stein and Clint Lamb, Travis Reier, thanks again. Until next week, so long.